Hello, my name is Hardy Johnson. I am president of the descendants of the illegitimate sons and daughters of the kings of Britain, also known as the royal bastards, and in polite company, the descendants. It's my privilege to welcome you to the second in a series of educational presentations on topics related to joining our organization and properly documenting royal descents generally. For the past 75 years, the bastards have been quietly setting the bar for the highest standards in genealogical research and documentation. Within the past 5 years, we've been making the scene like a grandmother in a miniskirt, reintroducing the bastards to a new generation of potential applicants. And we invite anyone who's interested to apply for membership, and we welcome all who are able to successfully demonstrate their eligibility, right? And to assist in that process, we proudly present these educational presentations. This is the second in a series without charge as a public service. We have officers here tonight. We have the Herald, Dr. Nathaniel Lane Taylor, Fellow of the American Society of Genealogists, and two assistant heralds, Darcy Pose, also a fellow, correct? Chris Child, certified genealogist. And I believe I saw Tony Hoskins, immediate past president, here. And I believe I saw Jim Terzian, who for 12 years was a voluntary secretary for the society. Tonight, our herald, Dr. Taylor, will discuss genealogical resources for pre-modern Britain. Nat, take it away.
Thank you, Hardy. And it's very gratifying to see a continued bolus of interest as we get what I hope is something useful to the field generally off the ground. So that said, a very, very brief overview of what I want to address today. I want to repeat myself a little bit from the first session about who we are and why we are doing what we do, and to then presage our application process, which should be demystified, and then dip into sources for pre-modern generations going back into Britain. And I've got it subdivided here between published sources and original or derivative records. Those lines blur, and the relative importance of using those is shifts at different points in the process. And that really relates to one of the most significant points I want to get to, which I'll get back to in a minute. And really to end with some philosophical points about how and why we do this, and how and why it's important to move past the royal descent compendia, which is the usual way in which information about our pre-modern ancestors is packaged for our consumption. But many of us on this call are coming to this as skilled genealogists, and why we should and how we can, and perhaps more easily than we might think, do better than that. So that's really what this is about. It's about moving past the typical sources in which the pre-modern lines are first encountered. So Hardy already brought this up. We were founded in 1950 by and for genealogists, serious genealogists. And I think what that means, and certainly what we mean by that now, is that we're not an exclusive organization for genealogists with particular credentials. It's rather a question of what unites us. So many hereditary societies unite with the mission of a shared interest in perpetuating the memory of the achievements of a certain group of qualifying ancestors. And this certainly presupposes a shared commitment to related historical themes and education around them. But the genealogical work that involves becoming part of a group or identifying yourself as a descendant of a qualifying ancestor really sometimes takes second seat to that. But the distinguishing ethos of the bastards is really about the genealogy, and it's about the genealogy more than the people to whom we are linked. And to quote the original Constitution, to promote scholarship and research on all so-called royal genealogical lines, And then I would paraphrase what goes beyond that is to have fun while doing it, to have fun while doing the research, to have fun while promoting scholarship and research. And the Bastards have always done that. I don't know how much fun you're having so far tonight, but that's something that we try to keep very seriously in mind as well. So Walter Lee Shepard's article about the founding of the Bastards recounts the discussions that led to a deliberate choice of ancestors who were, quote, essentially unimportant and without inherited social distinction. Now, as a historian, I realized that that's a bit of a misconception. Royal bastards were always powerful. They were always powerful by their proximity to one or both parents. And that is true. Proximity can be measured in different ways, and it was true. We can only imagine for many unacknowledged bastards as well as acknowledged bastards. The concept of bastardy is itself a social construct, and it's a social construct with essentially an inception date, which we can put in the 11th and 12th century. And that's why the royal bastards no longer pay much attention to the earlier medieval bastards that some people enjoyed, considering as part of the same thing. But the concept of bastardy is very much related to the evolving concepts of sacramental marriage and some of the political context of those theological, doctrinal concepts later on. So our educational goals are that the application is an opportunity for rigorous review of one line of our ancestry, but our educational goals really are to share our interests, share our expertise, to be willing to participate with others who are interested in learning some of the skills, some of the particular familiarity with particular kinds of records, and how to deal with genealogical sources from a different era. And this is something that I hope to find ways to do more of. And I'm speaking not only to genealogists who are members of the Bastards now when I say that, but to genealogists who are tuning in out of curiosity, who are not affiliated, who may not seek affiliation, that I am very interested in hearing more feedback about ways in which this group and the themes that come up in this talk and these others can be of use more generally in the field. So there are two key criteria for admission to the Bastards. We spent a little more time on this in the first session. The first is that the line must be sound. And the second is that it must be expressed in a way that upholds certain rubrics, that upholds versions of things that are derived from and an emulation of the genealogical proof standard. And I like to characterize that in simple English as the lineage paper, the application should show how we know what we know. And that's something it's deceptively elusive, even for people who've done a lot of genealogy. We sometimes omit the thought process for ourselves in reviewing what we know about our family, and this could be even our very close family, our most recent kin and ancestors, but also how to express those certainties, how we know what we know, to others. Lineage papers for hereditary societies are notoriously, well, what's a good word? Unuseful at expressing how we know what we know. And I'll come back to that. And that's one of the reasons for the innovations in our lineage papers. And the three real rubrics that boil down to it in the application process are that we document every fact separately. Every fact, a birth, a death, a marriage, the genealogical facts, and these are the genealogical data that define somebody. Bob Anderson said that somebody is genealogically defined. If you know who their parents are, you know who their partners are, you know who their children are. And a genealogical definition may or may not include dates. I mean, you can solve those other questions without dates. Document each fact separately. The only other lineage society whose paper does that, to my knowledge, right now, is the General Society of Mayflower Descendants. Then the other two rubrics are ones that we alone do, so far as I know. And we've experimented with how to elicit this, and we have experimented with how best to make it clear to people what this means. To describe the evidence for each fact, not just to cite volume and page number, but to say in a couple of words, it doesn't have to be a complete sentence, what it is that is the evidence, the record or the evidence that gives you the information that you're putting for a person. And then akin to that, but not related to a birth, marriage, or death date or place, who your partner is in a nutshell, describing the evidence for each generational link, parent to child. How do we know the child in one generation is the parent in the next? And that's something that, even more than all the other shortcomings, lineage papers seem so cut and dry because you've got, and especially when they're nice and tall, when they're 14 inches high, you're looking at a nice vertical line with people, named one after the other. Or family groups named one after the other. It gives you the illusion of authority, but finding a way to describe in words how you know that the person in generation 8 is the child of the person in generation 7, or vice versa, depending on which direction your papers go. And finally, and maybe this might be the most daunting part for many people, to feel that you're able to do this for both pre-colonial generations as well as modern generations in our family tree. I'm here to do two things. I'm here to try to introduce you to some of the quirks and foibles, the specific things that it's good to become familiar with when you start chasing your family tree back beyond immigration to the colonies. And some of these things are obscure, some of them are weird, some of them involve difficult, hard work. But I also want to demystify it. These are sources that have never before been as close to our touch as they are now. So we all have the ability to engage directly with the sources and with some of the scholarship more easily than at any point before the 21st century. And that's continuing to roll. So for recent generations, and this digs into the identifying the evidence rubric. For recent generations, on most lineage papers, people are familiar with the concept of adding a descriptive name for a source, which might be a death certificate or a marriage license. It might be something that you have a physical copy of. It might be something you've found online. And the descriptor of what it is generally something that it occurs to us to insert that. You could add a couple more words highlighting the important data that's in that record. So the death certificate may have both the birth date and the death date. The birth date, you're not sure it's necessarily accurate, depending on who was the informant for the death certificate. The death certificate might have the parents of the decedent, and that's actually, I consider that an important piece of one-stop shopping towards that extra goal of knowing how we know that somebody is truly connected to the generation of the parents. But for published information, and particularly as you go further back in any family tree, and this is true for the 19th century, in the 18th, you're using, abstracted public records, you're using records that might be serialized in a journal. The temptation is there because our Victorian predecessors did it, to just cite the volume and page of some series of records or a journal. But that doesn't help. It doesn't help you really understand how you know what you know, and it doesn't help anybody else looking at your work to be able to put any faith into it. So a citation is not the same as being able to describe the evidence to me, to your peers, to family members, to somebody else. And that's what we hope to encourage people to do. It takes more room. That's why our lineage papers have 1 page per generation. And sure, the page can have a lot of white space on it. But the opposite is the Mayflower descendants, who squeeze every piece of info that they can fit for a generation into about an inch of paper. So this is our goal. And it's something that we've had we've begun to have success getting people comfortable with this and encouraging people to really flesh out. That diligence is the diligence it takes to get into that is self-rewarding. You become more confident about your ability to say, well, yes, I feel comfortably connected to these ancestors. I feel confident in the work that I've done, because it's not just what your brain retains is not just the volume and the page of where you might have found something else. And most compiled genealogies do skimp on highlighting the evidence of that intergenerational link. And I had a couple of graphics that I debuted in the last session to express that. So if we think about the way most lineage papers are constructed, you've got a red box that has the data for somebody, and then you've got another red box that has the data for their parent or their child. So one way to think of those basic units of information are that they pertain to a person, and then you move on to the next person. Or one generation at a time, linking a child to a parent. And so this is an intermediate step, well, where that Mary and Zebulon had a child named Balthazar. But how do you know that it's actually the same as the Balthazar in the next generation of your line? And that's where this comes on, the idea of linking somebody both to parents and children at the same time. And one of the best one-stop ways of doing that, as I said, is testimony about the parents of a decedent in a death certificate, where you have one adult linked to the adults in a generation earlier. This is what Bob Anderson really was getting at when he defined this in the elements of genealogical analysis as genealogically defined, understanding a person's where they came from and who they may have brought into the world beyond them. And the classic example of the most important person in a lineage, in some contexts for research, is the person that we identify as a gateway. Now, a gateway is a generic, a sociological term for a bottleneck through whom ancestral information or knowable ancestral information is transmitted to descendants. And so a gateway is a link between two populations, an ancestral population and a descendant population, not necessarily geographically removed. It could be demographically, social mobility, upward and downward, religion, race. There are many different ways in which someone can be a gateway. But the real important desideratum of a gateway is exactly what we're getting at with this evidence of linking one generation to the next. You have to be able to prove where the gateway comes from and what is the descendancy of that gateway. If you haven't done that, then you haven't really defined the gateway. And there are many very wobbly gateways out there in the world, and I'm going to come back to those in a minute. So what we're really talking about in this organization is gateways to royal ancestry, mostly immigrants from Britain to America in the 17th, 18th century. One of our officers is descended from a 19th century gateway. These are the people who are treated in compendia. And I want to spend really some time digging into the concept of the compendia of gateway ancestors and royal descents. That's essentially the kernel of this, and the importance of moving beyond the compendia, and how to do that, how to begin to move beyond the compendia. In practical terms, that's really what we're looking at tonight. So one of the resources that's on this slide, and I don't come back to it, there is an online list of gateways at the hereditary.us, the Hereditary Society community website. And the origin of this list, it's a relatively short list, and there are many perfectly valid gateways, scholarly acceptable gateways, who are not on that list. This is a list that Nathan Murphy and I put together over the last 3-4 years, and it essentially includes only gateway ancestors who have been used for application to a very small, short list of good hereditary societies since 2015. And one of the things that I sort of people should take as a personal crusade is that if you descend somebody from somebody who's not on this list, but they should be, it's just that nobody has applied to any of these organizations through them recently, and always interested in hearing from people who are descended from gateways not on the list. Don't stridently complain, just join one of these organizations. That's the bottom line. So this is the kernel of something that could be a larger document, and I didn't complete it in time to circulate to people here on this call, but it's something that I do look forward to making available. A bibliography with hot links to most of these, well, all of these sources which are available online because they go back into the 19th century. So people can really use it as a quick reference path, or also to further explore some of the evolution of these things. And that's what I wanted to get to now. There's a real evolution from the 1880s to the 21st century. It's not entirely an evolution purely towards, success and glory and perfection. There are some sideways lines, perhaps some retrograde motion. Just to share a little bit, just a few of the highlights. This is from not the earliest of the genre of gateway compendia by Browning, Charles Henry Browning, but this is one whose title I like very much, Some Colonial Dames of Royal Descent, and the subject, the name I like very much, Mrs. Byron Dick of Oakland, and her descents from Hugh Capet, King of France, so two descents, two of her great-grandparents. You'll see that there are no dates, and there are no references or no citations, no dates, no places, no references. That's really the thing to keep in mind, and that defined the first 50 years of this type of publication. Going forward to Wurtz's Magna Carta from the World War II era. This is really interesting, a list of all the people who are descended from Robert de Ros, the Magna Carta surety, and obviously through his wife, who was an illegitimate daughter of King William the Lion, so qualifies for the Royal Bastards from earlier Scottish kings. And you'll see at the bottom of the page, he starts a genealogical path, which does have a couple of dates, but it still has no cited sources. And I like that list of all the people who have somehow satisfied Mr. Wurtz. In 1950, two things happened. The Royal Bastards were founded, and a clergyman, Frederick Louis Weiss, who was, I believe, member number 11. So he wasn't a charter member, but he was one of our very first members. He found out about this group. He had independently been working on what was, for the time, the most sort of scholarly, careful compendium of gateway ancestors, the ancestral roots of 60 colonists with royal descents. I can't remember the rest of the title. And what you see here is a big difference, and it's exactly the same as, and so this is the second edition from 1951. The first edition was from a few months prior, and it looks the same. They just exhausted the print run really quickly. And what you have, if you can see my cursor wobbling on the screen, each line actually has brief citations of the sources used. There are not so many dates in here. Actually, well, we get to dates here with William Longsword, illegitimate son of Henry II. And the citations there are highly abbreviated. The most frequently cited thing is the complete peerage. We'll come back to that. But he also cites Victoria County histories, and a genealogical article in the Boston Evening Transcript for one generation somewhere on this page, as well as other material. So Weiss is introducing the concept that it's important to cite sources into pre-modern genealogy. We're still before the foundation of the Board for Certification of Genealogists. We're still before any of the other real movements. The educational publications of the fellows of the American Society of Genealogists, again, date from a few years later, the most significant kind of educational publication for the field. So this is an early state. And here's another page which shows, and I box this because I'm going to come back to Thomas Butler, the Earl of Ormond, in another slide, cited to Complete Peerage 10, pages 131 to 133. There's a little bit of a weird omission here. I don't know if it's big enough for many of you to see it. It lists the seventh Earl of Ormond's second wife, but not his first wife, who was the mother of the daughter in the next generation. So this was corrected in several subsequent editions. Weiss's compendium, was still in print into the beginning of the 21st century. The 8th edition was published in 2000 and I don't have it in front of me, 2006 or 7. And as you can see here, both of Thomas Butler's wives are finally listed. And I didn't go and see which intermediate edition made those corrections. So the idea that a source gives you something to work with, citations, and is also capable of being corrected. Those are both significant developments. And now I'm going to jump forward much more significantly to one of the editions of Gary Roberts' Royal Descents of 600 immigrants. And what's interesting here is that there are no dates. So all the dates that are in the various editions of Weiss's ancestral roots are gone. And all the citations of sources are grouped only at the end of the line. And there are very specific reasons for this, and also only one line per gateway ancestor. Weiss pioneered a system where there are cross-references, and the same colonial ancestor might be connected back through several different lines that branch and refer you to different pages of the book to go back to different medieval kings or other figures of interest. What's cited here are some of the same things, the complete peerage, ancestral roots, certainly, and other things as well. So the most significant source that Gary listed first here is an article in The Genealogist by Charles Hanson, which corrected earlier work by another prominent genealogist on the same family, the Elkington family of New Jersey. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story about Charles Hanson on this. He had misgivings about one generation in this line. And after he published this work in The Genealogist, his misgivings grew to the point when he published a book that was a compilation of all of his own ancestry, complete. He left this out. He stopped it at the line which he thought was the potential problem, where he had encountered conflicting information, and he let it sit. And it was as recently as a couple of years ago, I've drafted an article not yet published on that problem generation. I shared it with Charles. I think this is okay. It works. But the point is that what Gary does here is he foregrounds the most important analytical piece of work on this line first in his list of citations. And that's important. And he mentions the name of the author of the article that's listed there. So here's a blurb on not the same people. Here we're going back to the Butlers and the Bullens in Douglas Richardson's Royal Ancestry from 2013. As you can see, the proliferation of detail is profound. And it brings forward Weiss's concept with many interlocking lines and cross-references. So a gateway is connected to many different lines of baronial or remote royal ancestry. The abundant detail is very gratifying for browsing. He has made a great effort to name all the children he could find in sources for each couple, not just the ones that continue the lines down to colonists. He cites a great deal more sources. And the sources are a large variety of compendia, earlier compendia, reference works. The complete peerage and other different peerage compilations are in here. There are local histories represented, histories of Norfolk and other counties that these people lived in. There are primary source records that are cited by their archival number. Some of the sources have parenthetical notes that tell you why they're included or what their relation is. None of the sources are connected granularly to any specific information in the sketch. So, as something to work with and to work beyond, as a roadmap for independent verification, it's actually kind of daunting. And I wrote a review of this work, or actually one of its predecessors, years ago, in which I touched on this. And it's something that I've observed being at once gratifying and intimidating for many different people with different levels of expertise in the genealogical community. So how do you use this? And that's what really I want to dip into for the rest of this session. And just to bang this over the head a little bit more, putting Roberts and Richardson head to head next to each other, one on top of the other. So Roberts might seem to come out the loser. There are no dates at all. And the bibliography is limited to some sources cited for the whole line. There are no primary sources cited, or that is to say, original or derivative records, as opposed to, narrative sources. And one thing that's interesting in the evolution of the editions of Roberts's Royal Descents, and it's one reason I prefer the first edition to the later editions, he promoted to the beginning of his source citations paragraph cross-references or citations to Richardson's royal ancestry. That's what he does in the Royal Descents of 900 Immigrants. So that no longer, for example, in the Elkington line is Charles Hanson's extremely detailed analytical article cited first. Instead, you've got Richardson's royal ancestry cited first. And so again, Richardson, in contrast, much more detailed dates and places, all children and others, but no hierarchical arrangement of the citations. And so I could multiply anecdotes of people laboriously tracking down all the sources in a Richardson article and failing to find something in there. But I'm not going to do that because Nathan has raised his hand. Nathan, I would love to have you butt in and ask a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One thing I like to point out too is Roberts has been published more recently than Richardson.
Yeah.
So even though the documentation differs so drastically, Roberts has many more potential gateways for you to look at that were published more recently. I think Richardson's supposed to come out with the new edition sometime soon, but for now, Roberts has the gateways that have been published and discovered since 2013.
Right. Well, Nathan, that's a good point. I don't want to hark just on the chronological leapfrog that, the sort of the most recent work is because of its recentness more authoritative. I really want to focus on the way in which they're structured differently, and so they're useful in different ways. And I've already said, paradoxically, why I prefer to pull off the shelf the first edition of Gary's compendia, because they don't have, simply a citation to Richardson's similar entries on these people. They give me a better idea because Gary has always been much more interested in crediting the original genealogical research when he shares a line. He's always intended these as bibliographical resources, while Richardson has intended his compendia to be one-stop shopping. And what I really the point I want to emphasize is that Richardson's one-stop shopping model does not succeed if you want to use any appropriate analog of the genealogical proof standard because of the opacity, the difficulty of going through the compiled information to be able to verify the evidence on which it's based. And that's really what the rest of this talk is about. I wanted to leave myself more than 15 minutes for the rest of this, but here goes. And I will start with the most important stuff. again, ironically, it's dipping back to material that is published so long ago that it's no longer, there have been plenty of things that have been found since then, but the way it's put together provides a surer model for the way in which it really makes sense to work with these materials. So the complete peerage, there have been many peerage compendia issued over centuries. The complete peerage was a revision of a work that was at the very end of the 19th century. Peerage is an interesting concept in Britain. It's not quite analogous to titles of nobility in other European countries. There is, unlike noble titles in other European countries, there's only one holder of a peerage title at a time. This was true in the early medieval concept of a peerage, lordships by summons to Parliament, by writ of summons to Parliament, and it's certainly true in the later medieval concept of a peerage by letters patent. And the complete peerage traces only the individual holder of a peerage title, who are usually linked genealogically from father to son, parent to child, brother to brother, this kind of thing. Some holders of some kinds of peerage titles have always been able to be women. Other titles could not be held by women. There are all sorts of quirks. But the complete peerage is limited in that way. And it's limited in that a sketch of a family of a holder of a peerage title, it will include spouses, but it won't include all children. It will only mention a child who might be the heir. And so one of the things to compare that with are the most abundant, publication family of things with peerage in the title are the various things that call themselves Burkes, named after a dynasty of 19th, early 20th century British heraldic officials who also industriously published these books. There are dozens of editions. There are separate volumes for current peerage titles who have living holders versus extinct ones. There are separate volumes for wealthy gentry families or families of a certain social status who don't have a peerage title or a baronetage or something. The landed gentry, one and only one volume of Burke's Landed Gentry included a 500-page supplement of self-aggrandizing Americans. That was in 1939. And so the Burkes peerages, they have no sources. They have very few dates. They're purportedly have fuller genealogies, so they list all children. There are plenty of Burke's entries that list fictitious children and families incorrectly constructed. They're notoriously iffy, older ones and some of the newer volumes as well. So there's a real difference. When we talk about the complete peerage, we're talking about one specific scholarly work. And here's what a page of it looks like. And this is also a page from the Butlers, the Earls of Ormond in the 15th century. And so you've got the same thing. It looks kind of like a Richardson page. You've got main text at the top and a whole bunch of sources down below. But in this case, they are tied on a footnote basis, on a granular basis. They are tied to each asserted fact. So you can actually find things. You can find how we know that the third Earl of Ormond died either September 6th or September 7th of 1405. And the footnote actually tells you the sources of the conflicting information. That's the kind of thing that everyone should realize the value of taking that extra step to know how you know what you know about ancestors who can be as remote as this, 700-800 years. And this is what we do on a bastard's lineage paper. So here's a page from a recent paper that's a similar, it's actually, no, sorry, it's for the daughter of the person on the previous page. So Margaret Butler and her husband, Sir William Bullen, and the Bollens, she's the grandmother of one of Henry VIII's wives. And so there are 7 evidence fields at the bottom of the page. The first evidence field is for evidence of the lineage link. And here in a simple sentence, Margaret was the daughter and one of the two co-heirs to her father's barony of Ormond. And this is what really clinches our faith in that the genealogy is correct. It was understood that she was an heiress in her issue, and that really does fix what we know about her parents. The other things cited here are specific bits in the complete peerage, including a short statement of what it is that the complete peerage mentions in a footnote as the basis for a death date, a marriage date, and so on and so forth. So the complete peerage is the first stop to go beyond the compendia, but it only helps you for the generations that are closest to the royal bastard, and that might be a couple of generations at the beginning of at the beginning of the line in the 12th and the 13th century. Where else do we go to look for other material that is as carefully done as what one finds in the complete peerage? Because the complete peerage doesn't deal with enough people. And so I want to spend the rest of the time here briefly surveying the places that I know to look and the places that I want people to get more familiarity digging. And some of them are better than others. And I'm starting with one that I've had, intense discussions about the shortcomings of, Charles Colley's Medieval Lands database. But it has the benefit of being something that has a little bit of the look and feel of the complete peerage and extends beyond it into other baronial and gentry families for Britain. And it extends geographically beyond it. It's extremely ambitious into most other medieval realms in Western Europe, which is an astonishing feat. It's certainly by no means as careful in its coverage of all these different areas in which it goes into. But it carries forward the concept of the complete peerage, and it does try to present, and certainly for families that have been better examined than others, you're going to find a lot of detail there that is carefully sourced to some sources. Beside that, these others pale in comparison. They're useful for very different purposes. Genealogics was started by an amateur in Australia about 30 years ago, Leo van der Pas, who's since deceased. And it's a very copious, industrious compilation of conventional wisdom for many medieval lines. And so it's fun to use the family tree feature as a kind of handy visual compendium of conventional wisdom. That said, the error rate is still reasonably high, although I know people who have been diligently and quietly working at making corrections to the data. But that's more of a private effort. And so it's a little bit different from what Wikitree is beginning to show us. And Wikitree is interesting because it's extremely uneven. It only has what people have contributed to it. But at its best, Wikitree can be a surprisingly informative and erudite repository for people who've really dug into a question and have, their only, solution for sharing the real research they've done is to paste it into a Wikitree entry. So I always urge looking at Wikitree and seeing if it does anything that's beyond the published sources that one already has. Now I'm going to show you a couple of these things. This is a screenshot of Colley's Medieval Lands. It's a section on some of the English earls created in the 12th century and carried forward. And so we have the Ranulph Earl of Chester here. You've got the kind of navigational menus at the top. It's an interesting kind of pop-up menu system. Once you get used to it, it's easy to use. And what you have here is a very dense and very laboriously typed, in some cases scanned and then corrected. But each of the red footnotes hot links to an actual citation, some cases to secondary sources, in some cases to primary sources that have been primary sources in print mostly. And I'll come back to what those are and what is the threshold at which we actually need to dip into primary sources and whether we should be intimidated by that or not. So I recommend Colley's Medieval Lands, but of course, even that also has its problems. In addition to genealogical databases, the two major biographical databases, the Dictionary of National Biography and the History of Parliament Online, are both enormously helpful. Unfortunately, they have compiled sketches written by, in most cases, by good historians and biographers, but they don't have granular footnoting of data. They might have incidental mention of what the evidence is for certain things. There are some interesting touches of irony. The Oxford Dictionary of National Biography is a 100-year newer update to the first Dictionary of National Biography, which was a Victorian product. And ironically, the earlier articles tended to have more genealogical information on them, and the later articles are going to be more correct. They're going to be more interesting in terms of the historical context for most of these figures, but they're also going to mention fewer children, fewer other details that a genealogist might want to see. And so it's actually always good, provided you have access to the new one, which is behind a paywall. It's always useful to compare the old and new Dictionary of National Biography entries on figures, on medieval figures. But one of the best sources for even more detailed biographical bits on late medieval gentlemen and some gentlewomen who might be in our pre-modern family trees is the History of Parliament Online. Many more people than we tend to give credit for ended up serving in one parliament or another. They represented a borough, they represented a shire. There are different ways in which people could get tapped for this. And there's pretty good coverage. It's not complete. There's a gap of very well-written articles that are all available online for free. The History of Parliament Online.org. The problem is the gap between 1422 and 1509 in the modern series, but there was a 1936 offering that covered 1439 to 1506, and a lot of people tend to forget that that's also accessible. You can find it on Family Search. And again, the same thing, you can find sometimes more genealogical tidbits leaned into in the 1936 Wedgwood's History of Parliament for those years than the newer sketches. They're always worth looking into. And here's what it looks like, the online interface of the History of Parliament Online with a sample biography, Sir William Skipwith of Lincolnshire. So from genealogies to biographies to bibliographies and explainers, one of the best intermediate sites that I use to navigate to all kinds of other things from it is, again, the work of a single person, Chris Phillips's Notes on Medieval English Genealogy. He links hundreds of online books, records, and some journal runs as well, visitations, public records, the close and patent rolls, the feet of fines, the calendars of IPMs. I want to come right back to what those are. Actually, I want to dip into that now, and then we'll come back to these other things in a moment. So this, nope. I'm going to start with what's on the bottom here, the British History Online, which hosts the Victoria County Histories. So these are the local history focused, which have compiled genealogies of families who were major landowners, held manorial property, and there's not complete coverage, but these are shire by shire, locality by locality, and they look like this. For the parish of Empingham here, this is from the county Rutland, and there's a blurb on generations of members of the Mackworth family that were owners of that manor. And then if you scroll up and down, you'll find the coats of arms and discussions of the genealogies of the other families before and after them. This is Chris Phillips's site, Some Notes on Medieval English Genealogy, very modestly titled, but it is a marvelous central clearinghouse of literally hundreds of public record volumes. And I want to dip into more of those that I really consider collectively as calendars. Calendars is the traditional British word for English word for abstracts that are arranged, something between an index and a fuller abstract. And the things that are most frequently cited for evidence, granular evidence in complete peerage articles, include the calendars of the patent and closed rolls, these abstracts of royal acts for public or private consumption relating to land, military, fiscal, legal issues, etc. The inquisitions post-mortem, kind of fiscal probate, like a probate process, legal action following the death of all major landowners from the 13th through the 15th centuries, shows the date of death, who is the heir of that property, according to whatever the relevant laws are for that property in that region, and how old is the heir. Almost all of these are published for the entire run in abstract form, excellent abstracts, and that publication was, has continued into the 21st century. Will probably won't mention more here now. So here's a sample page from one of the published calendars of the Inquisition's post-mortem for Agnes, who was the wife of Earl Lawrence, Earl of Pembroke, Lawrence Hastings. And there were different legal actions in different counties. They all agree, they mention her date of death, they mention who is her heir, or who is the son and heir. Yes, who is her heir, and that it's interesting that they separately print this for each of the little legal proceedings that was held in each county in which that person held land as a tenant in chief of the king. This is the sort of thing that is absolutely one of the most frequently cited things that gives you the date of death of somebody who was not just a peer, but and it could be a relatively modest landowner, and always worth and much more readily accessible than people realize. And there's in most cases, there's no need to pull these original documents, which are in Latin, from the National Archives, but I do want to raise that concept. Now more than ever, it's possible to get yourself face-to-face with the original documents that the English in particular have so assiduously calendared for decades. The National Archives and its website has a centralized index of records from archival holdings from all over the UK. We have nothing to match it in the United States. It has many different finding aids and explainers, so you can learn about these documents, what you're likely to find in them. You can get comfortable working with them. You can't pull up images of the documents from there. You can pull up detailed or, at least marginally useful abstracts, indexes. But then the next thing is an astonishing resource that is sort of a twin of what one finds in the National Archive. It's called the Anglo-American Legal Tradition. It was started out of the law department at the University of Houston in Texas. And it has, I think, between 6 and 7 million, or is it over 8 million now, legal record images from the National Archives, imaged under license. Almost all of them are not indexed. The percentage of what is indexed is very low. But if you have a reference from, and depending on the set, and some of the sets are not indexed at all, at least online in the UK. But there are many cases where you might find something of interest indexed and abstracted on the National Archives website, which then you can actually go find the original page if you are so interested. I'm going to completely ignore the Scottish equivalent. I do want to point out one thing that's in the Family Search Wiki in the article titled Medieval England Records that Paul Reed developed, and it's an interesting timeline. Each of the kinds of legal records, mostly legal records on this list, that are available, accessible, are laid out on timelines. And not only that, but this list is hot linked to descriptive blurbs, some of them at the TNA website, some of them at Chris Phillips's website, some of them elsewhere. This was something done by our colleague Paul Reed, and it's probably underused. It's a long list. I'm just showing you the first half of it. And here we have an example of the search screen of the National Archives Discovery Catalog in the UK. And simply by typing in a surname and the word Chancery, I've pulled up, about a dozen abstracts of, short blurbs about lawsuits engaged in by members of this family, which give us a lot of interesting information about certainly when somebody was alive, where they held their land, and perhaps more things that are genealogically useful. And here is the homepage of the Anglo-American legal tradition at the University of Houston. And please don't be frightened. Here is one example of a document from the plea rolls. And this is 15th century. It's in Latin. I had this one because it was crucial. It turned upside down a whole case, an article I'd been working on for a long time with a co-author. And I dipped into this and I was shocked by what I found, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. So there's a teaser for you. It wasn't that shocking, but it did invalidate the author's original thesis. We had to rewrite the whole thing. But there you have it. So I need to try to sum this up because we're already all the way at the top of the hour, which is typical for me, and I apologize. What are the most important sources to feel that you would like to get to know if you want to move beyond the compendia to the granular level of knowing how you know what you know? Well, the first thing to do is to move from the compendia to analytical secondary sources that give you more information. The complete peerage is going to be your best bet for that for the very earliest generations. Every royal bastard is going to be connected to the peerage, at least, at one degree of remove, and further down in any line for probably 2, 3 generations, in some cases, several more. And that will give you the data you need to really flesh out and go towards, feeling that you are confident that you know how you know what you know about this particular line. Once you leave the peerage and go into the landed gentry in the later Middle Ages, you're much more at sea in other things. But for so many of these families, they have been looked at by others. The very first order of business is to search for scholarly American journal articles that have taken a line from a colonist back, because they're going to blaze the path. And in many cases, they're going to actually give you all the granular information that you need. You'll be able to pick it out. It's the same information that's in the compendia by Richardson. And here it is laid out with a footnote for every piece of data by Charles Hanson or Neil Thompson or others. If you don't have that, you're going to look for that in other genealogical compilations by Brits, for Brits. You can find those in the Victoria County histories. You can find confirmation of things like death dates and this sort of thing in the IPMs, the Inquisition's postmortem, as we've shown. There are a lot of other things. I want to, actually, I think, I'm going to skip ahead to visitations and then move back to that timeline because it takes us into the modern period. So what about visitations? Visitations are fun because they lay out pedigrees if you pull these published books off the shelves, and they cover just that period, the period where after the complete peerage, but before the colonial immigration, they give us a lot of information for the generations between, say, 1400 and 1600 or 1680, because these were records collected between 1530 and 1688. The guiding principle was that 3 generations of a family was to be recorded. And this was essentially to regulate the use of coats of arms by those who, were entitled to be considered among the gentry. For many pre-modern lines, these are a valuable bridge but they almost always can only be used to corroborate other information. And some of the additions of visitations include additional information that's helpful, that where you know where it comes from. Others are corrupted by the addition of stuff that the editor thought was useful, but you can't tell whether it's original to those records from that period or put in later. So there are some pitfalls. In many cases, internal or external evidence can allow us to gauge how trustworthy the visitations are. It's not a foolproof process. And I myself have been hoodwinked by visitations where, well, certainly the guy who gave this information to the Herald would have been right about who his aunt was. But there again, he turned out to be wrong, and that invalidated a great deal of research. These things happen. Visitations they can be very terse. Generally speaking, the shorter a visitation, the more reliable it's going to be. So here's a 6th-generation visitation from Lincolnshire. Typical, it has no dates, it has no corroborating information, but there might be a way in which that is useful. Just to go back to that timeline again, as you move forward in time, you're getting back into familiar ground. But what I encourage everyone to do who wants to go through this process, to really feel that you know more about how you know what you know about pre-modern lines, is to compare what you're looking at for a medieval generation to what you already may know for something much more modern. You may find that it's not so different after all. It's not so intimidatingly remote after all. All of us who work seriously in genealogy know that every region and every slice of the timeline has its own special things that it helps to be more familiar with. But the more you do in any period, the more you begin to get confidence in your ability to separate the sheep from the goats, and the more you realize the value of an instinct always to learn how you know what you know, to get beyond the compendium to the granular detail, to be able to articulate to yourself or others what the evidence is. And that really comes back down to the kernel of what I wanted to emphasize tonight. The compendia are, for most of us, the first introduction to these royal lines, but they don't allow us to say how we know that these lines are true. I'm hoping that we as a group and those who are interested in these sessions can, agree on the importance of this for early generations as well as the more modern things that we may be more familiar with. So, what are the goals, strategies, and value of all of this? And then I'll shut up. Understanding that evidence is more important than a citation. Always, and here I'm just channeling colleagues like Elizabeth Shown Mills, aren't I? Evidence is what we should be working with, not quote unquote sources or citations. Identifying evidence for data in all generations and not just throwing a mass of citations of evidence to a generation and saying, well, this defines that generation. A generation and a person in a generation is defined by knowing the specific things about them and knowing how you know those specifics about them. And most of all, how you know the lineage link from one generation to the next. You probably forgive me because I will always be coming back to that point. I see that as one of the most important to make here. And so in this way, I think I've given you a little bit more dipping into some of these pre-modern sources. I think I've tried to preach too much about why it's good to do so. But I do want to close by saying, well, this model, the Bastard's lineage model, granular documentation, descriptive of evidence, I think should have a much broader currency, perhaps in more lineage societies. than it does, because it really does bridge the gap between typical work for a lineage paper and more absorbing and more rewarding work that goes towards meeting the genealogical proof standard. With that, now I will finally shut up. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to have a free-for-all for questions.